Imagine a perfect world where you can build a restaurant, open the doors, and make loads of money. Unfortunately, those days are over. It takes great leadership, hard work, and long hours to operate a successful restaurant. Together, we can make it happen. This is Restauranttopia.
All right, welcome back to Restauranttopia. We have a micro episode here today. There's been a lot of questions and issues with the PPP, and Jamie Romano is here to answer a few more questions and really talk about FTEs, full-time equivalents, and what that looks like for your organization and how to get the maximum forgiveness for your restaurant. So I'll let Jamie kick it off here. Go ahead, Jamie. How are you doing? Good afternoon.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for the introduction. So I got a lot of phone calls and emails about full-time equivalents and people that said they had used 30 hours and 35 hours instead of the 40 hours that we had discussed previously. And that's honestly okay. So I wanted to share with everyone, when calculating it, as long as there's no cap on the number of hours per full-time equivalents, it all works out the same mathematically. So I have here, I showed various examples of if you had divide by 30, you divide by 35, you divide by 40. In this example, it all ends up the same in terms of the ratio, which is what they're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at the ratio of the previous periods that there's 2 periods that you're allowed to select compared to the 8 weeks after you get the funds, what your average FTEs are every week. So I just wanted to clarify that for everyone because I didn't want anyone getting concerned about if they had used 30 or 35 instead of the 40. As long as there's no cap, it ends up being the same ratio anyways. I will say that the SBA and the Treasury have not issued final guidance on the FTEs and how to calculate them yet. So it is kind of up in the air. And to that point, there is a chance that they could potentially put a cap on FTEs in terms of the hours allowed per individual. Now, this is not a set in stone. This is not something that has actually happened. This is just reality where you're dealing with a $700 billion program that's issued in really a 90-day period that could have the majority of it forgiven with very little auditing or oversight. And that's going to cause potentially a lot of fraudulent activity where people are going to have either ghost employees or they're going to be fictitiously increasing hours. And one way to mitigate that would be to cap the number of hours allowed per full-time equivalent. So the way that would work as an example is, let's say you capped it at 40 hours. Then if you showed it on payroll that they work 60, that would count for only 1 full-time equivalent as opposed to the typical method where it would count as 1.5.
But this cap hasn't been implemented yet, correct?
This is just a possibility. It's guidance for how to officially calculate FTEs is going to come out later. This is just something that I had been talking with others when we had talked about the program in general and potential, honestly, areas of fraud that could be committed. And this was one area that we thought might happen, and then how might the SBA and the Treasury decide to limit it as much as possible.
One thing that I want to express to the audience is this is a good opportunity at the beginning of this to be very good about record keeping. If you have an employee who is paid a salary but is working 60 hours, track that 60 hours. I mean, there's no fraud in being 100% accurate. There may be a cap put on it later, but at this point, make sure that you can document and defend everything that you do moving forward. And I think, whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, if an auditor come into your location, what does that look like? Well, here it is. Take a look. I'm 100% transparent, and I did everything on the up and up.
And to that end, if you have had employees on salary, as Brian mentioned, make sure you are listing the hours and include yourself too. I know a lot of owners, especially right now, are just working a ton of hours because they're trying to figure out how to make things work. So make sure that you're documenting that and including it as you put in your payroll. The best case scenario is that when they do the full-time equivalents, if you've shown all these hours and there is no cap, you get a little bit of a bump, which you deserve, for FTE forgiveness. Worst case scenario, if they cap it, you're really no worse off than before.
What I see that this could be a potential issue, and you let me know if you agree or disagree, Jamie. You maybe don't go 100% of your operation. You bring back half of your staff. You're not getting the hours like you were if you had, say, 6 employees and now you're down to 3. You're only getting 120 hours out of that 6 employees.
Correct, and that's how they are going to potentially penalize people on the forgiveness. So if they have half as many FTEs during the 8-week period as they did in the other selected periods, then of the total forgiven amount spent, only half would be forgiven. So FTEs are going to be very important. We'll definitely be monitoring and notifying everyone as soon as they do issue the final guidance on how to calculate it. But as for right now, just keep excellent records, make sure if they are working more hours that you're documenting it, and that's really all we can do right now.
No, and this is a layup for an auditor too. I mean, they're going to go right to this calculation and how you did it because it's going to relate to your forgiveness.
So we did have a big deal here this week. We had a notification from the Treasury that they actually made a big change. So one of the ideas that we had been discussing was when you go and you contact your former employees, what do you do if they just don't respond or don't want to come back? Whether they're making more unemployment or they got another job or whatever the case may be, what do you do? Because you've got to hit these full-time equivalents and the clock is ticking on the 8 weeks. Well, they did come up with a potential solution. So here was the question. It was buried on a frequently asked question. It was, will a borrower's PPP loan forgiveness amount be reduced if the borrower laid off an employee, offered to rehire the same employee, but the employee declined the offer? And the answer was no, which is a big deal.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's huge. And it says that the Treasury intends to issue, so not yet, intends to issue an interim final rule excluding laid off employees whom the borrower offered to rehire from the CARES Act loan forgiveness reduction calculation. So that could be potentially huge. Now there is a caveat to that. You do have to, it mentions again in the rule that's not yet issued, the interim final rule will specify that to qualify for this exception, the borrower must have made a good faith written offer of rehire, and the employee's rejection of that offer must be documented. And so, Brian, if you could go into a little bit of detail on, I get that it's not finalized yet, but what that might look like.
A letter out to the last known address. Certified is always nice. I don't know if they're going to require that you do that. If you text the employee a screenshot of that text and of their response, and if you email that employee, make sure that you capture that email and print that too. I mean, it's a lot harder to find, an email 2 years from now to Billy that he didn't want to come back than it is to let's just hit print now and put that all in your file, because I'm assuming that's going to be required to also submit to the bank. So again, document. You need to be having a folder and not just a shoebox that we throw everything in. Jamie, as an accountant, we can appreciate that. Make sure that you document, print, and keep a copy.
Absolutely. So along those same lines, what happens when an employee quits or refuses work when available? And so Brian's going to go into what you as the employer should do, can do, and will do.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. So this is right in that same kind of the same ballpark as what happens when you have an employee. We're in Ohio, and in this area of the show, we're really just talking about Ohio. The Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services controls unemployment here. And you recalled the employee. He's been furloughed or he's been laid off, and you call him up and you say, hey, Governor DeWine has opened patios on May 15th. I want you back on the 14th. And they refuse to come back. This is interesting because in the past, everything was so kind of streamlined. The employee would have to check in with unemployment every week and fill out a form, and this would get caught a lot quicker. But as the numbers came out today, we have record unemployment. All these systems have kind of ground to a halt. So what the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services have done is they created a website where you can report the employee and let them know that this employee has been offered work back and that they refused. So this at least puts something in the system that allows this to be documented, and ultimately that employee will probably lose their unemployment. There are some carve-outs under the CARES Act, which they may be able to qualify for. But I think you as an employer have to go to the website, fill this out, and make sure that this is documented. I think it will benefit all employers to kind of make sure that all employees are getting back into the workforce.
No, good point, Brian. So any other questions that come up, always feel free. I like getting them, and we're all trying to figure this out together. So as we find out new information, we will definitely keep everyone informed. So as the new guidance on that FTE rule and the written offer, as we get final guidance on that, as we get final guidance on the FTEs, and really any other changes, we'll definitely keep everyone in the loop. We will be emailing this, posting on LinkedIn, all of that.
And if you have any issues or any questions on anything relating to coronavirus and what you can do for your restaurant, please reach out to us. We want to help. We want to make sure that local independent restaurants are successful and make it through this. And I hope everyone has a great day and has a lot of carry out and take out customers. So have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is a high quality pod. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Adios.
Thank you for listening to Restaurantopia. The gratitude that we have for each and every one of you spending your precious time to listen to this podcast is immeasurable. Please make sure to tell a friend about this podcast. And also, if you have any feedback for us, visit us on restaurantopia.com and drop us a line. You can also subscribe on your favorite place to listen to podcasts. Thank you and have a great day.
All right, we will start this over. I'm glad this wasn't live. Yeah.
This is where Dave Ross would have came in helpful.
Yeah.
He would have picked up on that.
All right, well, let's start over.
Yeah. Do you need me to do anything to share the screen, or you got it?
Oh, God. I'm really not doing well today, huh?
You want to be honest. You want to be good at record keeping, and you want to be able to stand up to scrutiny later on if a bank or an auditor or someone would come in and take a look at this and say, hey, how did you calculate 5 million hours? Well, it's like I had all the grandkids on the payroll. Like you got to be able to calculate this so it makes sense, but so it's defendable. And that's one thing I want to go back to is this calculation is because it's going to determine whether or not some or all this money is forgivable. So that's really why they're going to look at it very, very closely.
Correct. So other than actually using the money for payroll, this is how they determine what's forgiven. So it's a very important calculation. And although you want to maximize it to your advantage, you also don't want to get in a situation where you're just making things up.